And we are live. Hey there, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. I guess depends where everyone is at. Uh, Welcome to another Seattle Data Guy live. Today with us, we have Anna. How are you doing this morning, Anna?
Doing good. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. You've been working kind of as a director of like data analytics and engineering for a little bit. I know a little bit at Vail Resorts, but then before that, it was a lot in healthcare. I don't know why I didn't realize that before. I think a week ago, and I checked, I was like, oh, you did a ton in healthcare. But yeah, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, kind of what you do, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm very passionate about like working with data and being able to drive value with leveraging it. And early on in my career, it really started in like software development, but really like data was the meat of the application. So it kind of led me to that. But yeah, I can share more about like personally what I like to do when I'm not working with data. Very much enjoy spending time with my family and friends. Travel is something that I look forward to as well. But what I'm really doing is photography is one of my other passions. And so I did open a photography business. I want to say now 6 or 7 years ago. And it came from like watching my girls grow so fast. Like, how does it happen? How does it keep happening that they just keep growing? And yeah, what I really enjoy about photography is then being able to look back
Mm.
at images. I feel like it's almost like a ticket back to a moment in time that otherwise you kind of forget it. Our memory is not the best for sure with time passing. So that's one of the things that I enjoy doing for sure. And then I got into coffee making a bit ago, and I have to kind of get back into that. But I thought that was super fun. I enjoy making coffee for folks and also drinking a lot of coffee.
Yes. Yes, I definitely consume plenty of coffee as well. That was very much I feel like a height of I feel like COVID thing where it was like
Yeah.
I don't know if that's when you picked it up, but I know like that seemed to be when people were like, well, we're stuck at home anyways. They start
Yeah.
to you pick up some habits and
Yeah.
you
It
drink
was
a lot of
around that
coffee.
time frame, actually. You're right.
Yeah. Well, talking, so that's what you do outside of data. So how did you get into data?
Yeah. So for college, I studied systems engineering and a lot of like the software development, but there within those classes that I was taking, there was a lot of like data structures and thinking about, the databases and structuring the data. And so, with the software development, I think like the first 8 years of my career were very focused in software development in the healthcare space, actually. So, Kaiser Permanente, United Healthcare. And there was a point in time in my career where I became much more interested in like the databases and almost like the performance of them. And because it kind of there's this whole concept of like front end and back end that I think always for anything that I'm doing. And really, you want to have like a really well built back end for the front end to do good job for the application. And so in 2010, there was like this MySQL DBA certification. Back then, it was MySQL that I think Sun or no, Oracle was acquiring Sun back then. So maybe it dates me a bit, but I was like, yeah, I want to do this certification. This is really interesting to me. And then as I progressed with other roles and projects in the software space, my manager at the time was, well, you're very passionate about this whole like backend and data stuff. Do you want to start supporting like other development teams on like the best practices and query tuning, etc.?
Mm.
But SQL was there from the beginning of time for sure. I feel like I speak English, Spanish and SQL are like my languages. But I am from working from getting closer to the data space, I was provided some opportunities to support some data migration projects. So I think this was like around 2014 or so. Adobe Flex and Swift files, whoever knows what I'm talking about, were going to be deprecated. And so we needed to move to like HTML5. And there was a lot of wanting to modernize the front end of the applications. And with that also came the thinking about modernizing the back end or migrating the back end. So our development team focused on a CRM application home built. Um, that was customized for many healthcare companies. And so some of them actually wanted to move to Salesforce. And so different backend. Um, and so had to start leading some of these like data migration projects of like, okay, we're going to need to, do some ETL work to move the data over to Salesforce, or there was a need for data archiving. There was so much data in our production
Hmm.
environment, and like performance would take a hit with us trying to like just query these very large tables. And so like archiving years of data. And then also seems super silly, but I remember the time there was this like data purge project. And so there was, from a compliance perspective, some data that needed to be removed for a state where we no longer operated in. And so having to work through that um, was kind of how I started to get into that. And then as I got closer to it, my thought was very much like, wait a minute, this is not only the meat of an application, but like, what can we do with this, right? Like there's value in this actually. And so that put me more in this path of like, I want to go down like data engineering and analytics. And that's when I did my shift to Kaiser Permanente, and have enjoyed it ever since. So like I've continued to learn, because I think we're always learning in the path. And also as you continue to progress in your career, it's like, well, how can you then like mentor others and share your trajectory, and while learn from others as well. And but that's kind of how I got into data, so very much from the software space.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's definitely one of the paths I see is people coming either from the software or maybe sometimes again data science side or data analyst are the common kind of paths. Any tips for anyone doing migrations, some data migrations out there?
Oh my gosh. And nowadays there's just so many, different tools that you can use, and also depending on what like cloud provider you're in, et cetera. But early on I was using Informatica, and actually
Mm,
very early on was like bash scripts, running SQL. So it was very, very much like creating my own ETL there. But Informatica, then with Kaiser, we use Data Stage. I think just looking at what tools are out there. When I worked at Apostrophe Health, that was a startup in healthcare, they were on the AWS cloud, so we used AWS Glue
mm,
there. But yeah, thinking of what cloud you're on and what are the different tools, and then just like really any courses you want to do on that or any learning, but really working through actual projects is what's going to give you like the best experience, for sure.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's still plenty of people who have their ETLs in Bash scripts or Python scripts, so it hasn't changed too much. We just it hasn't changed as much, I think, as some people think.
Yeah.
Um, Someone asked about the session, kind of what's going to be about. The focus of this session is going to definitely be. We're going to dive into it now. It's going to be around like going from IC to director. Recently Anna was the director of data analytics at Vail Resort. So if anyone ever goes skiing, she was the one managing all your data. Were you managing or tracking all the data, or at least analyzing the data where it's like, when you ride the ski lifts, you can like see where you're at? Would you be analyzing like that, like how many runs people go or things like that?
Oh my gosh, so much data there for sure. I mean, definitely limited on the details of what I can share there, but so much data available for the all of the different customers, and and what they're up to, and our ability to learn more about them as well, so that we can better communicate with them. But absolutely all of our all of our different lifts and terrains and things like that, data points around those is definitely available within the resorts.
Yeah, no, it was very very cool. Well, the first time I went skiing, and I was like, oh wow, they actually have a lot of really interesting information. They're tracking everything from how fast I'm going to a lot of cool stuff that you kind of get back.
Yes, pretty cool stuff for sure.
So diving into it, how do you go, at least in your mind, from an IC to some form of either manager or director, VP? How does that kind of happen in your experience?
Yeah, I think for me, so when I was explaining this case of like my manager providing opportunities to step in more into like the data engineering versus the software engineering work, um, there, once I started to work on these projects and became kind of that subject matter expert of how we do these things, there was almost like this need to grow that, right? And so then there were folks on the team that were, reaching out of like, hey, we want to be able to understand more of how we did this. Or there was more scope of like, oh, well, now we've done this. So now we need to do it again, but for this other customer. And so then that's where you notice you need to, be able to like grow your impact almost. And you really can't do it by yourself. Like you really need a team.
Yeah.
And so back then I had my first direct report within data engineering and supporting a lot of these like migration projects. But there's a need in that transition of delegating. And so early on, when you're in this individual contributor role, you really want to like, this is my baby, my project that I'm working on and so proud of. But you really want to, and you're working with other developers and whatnot as well, but you want to be able to not just share the work with others, but delegate work to others and provide kind of a vision of like, look, this is
Mm,
what I'm thinking, how we need to set this up. This is what has worked in the past. This didn't work so well, so we need to reimagine it, so that that other person gets a sense of like where they need to focus on.
yeah.
Right. And there's a little bit of almost providing like the organization of the work, or the prioritization of the work as well as
Yeah.
part of the delegation, which wouldn't come as natural in that like individual contributor role. And then just wanting to be able to like mentor others, like actually enjoy it. If that's something that you want to be able to do, I think that creates that differentiating point when you start to make that move. And then when you like continue to enjoy it, you're like, well, now I want to do like more of this, is how you notice you definitely want to kind of like continue down that track.
Yeah. I like that you called out like having a vision, because I do think there's something well, I don't know what the quote was from a book where it's like it it might be from the Pragmatic Programmer or one of those books, but it's like if you want to get people to build boats, you don't want to teach, like you don't want to tell them how to, you don't want to tell them like go build a boat. You want to teach them the yearn for the sea, which I think is a good way of putting it. Where it's like, yeah, you got to make them want to finish this project. You want to make them excited for it.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. Oh, then that's a really good point. There's also some sense of like motivating then the team too. When you start to grow the team, how can you keep them motivated as well? And sharing kind of that vision as well can help with that.
yeah. Were there any other skills you feel like you had to kind of pick up and to kind of help you grow into these roles?
Yeah, I think there's in terms of skills, there's, mentioned the like mentorship and development somewhat of others, the delegation aspect. But I think there's kind of this resource allocation
Mm,
aspect, as well as like project management. Once you start to also get into this world where there's like multiple projects,
mm,
there's almost a sense of ownership, or that you're responsible for these projects to be completed, right? And you're not the only person working on them. And so how can you ensure that from a like project management perspective, they are moving in the right direction? So that if you need to step in to support more or less, et cetera, based on how it's going, that you can do some of that. There's I think like differentiating from going from an IC to a manager, and then from a manager to then a director. Like early on as a manager, you are, supporting your direct team of individual contributors. But then when you move into the more of this director role and you're actually supporting managers, there's also a component of like developing the managers as well in their role, being able to work more on like talent assessment, right? There's a lot of more hiring, thinking about retention of your talent, is definitely important. And then I would say as well, like thinking more about risk management. So when you're working on a project, almost thinking ahead of like what are the issues or challenges we could run into and what we're trying to develop.
mm,
That maybe as an individual contributor, you're like, I just want to get this work done. thinking more ahead of that so that you can share to the team for them to be mindful of those things and think about it up front. Motivating the team, which we talked about. I think back to the project management of like what is their capacity and are they doing good? Are they blocked with any work? Like you definitely want to be able to support the team if they're needing your help, but making sure they're not burning out is something that
Mm,
I think I like spend a good amount of time if I see that there's feedback that they're running into those type of issues, so that how can I support them in that way. And then there's a lot of, especially when you move more into from manager to director role, there's a lot of leaning into the networking and relationship building, particularly even with not just your stakeholders, but other departments,
mm,
because you're really wanting to, um, from a prioritization and planning perspective, like think ahead of what
yeah.
is the work your team, where your team can make an impact in the future. And that's really the kind of the space that you have now, since you're not in like the day to day, for example, it allows you some of that time and space to like be thinking ahead of like where can the team support in the future? What are areas of the business where they can definitely make an impact and bring value? So I think those are like the different areas. On this relationship one, there's for sure a lot of learning on the how to influence others and
Mm.
relationship management, and a lot of time spent there for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that comes up a lot from these conversations that I've had, where it's like, being able to build bridges across various groups, not just because you're going to get things done, or because maybe in the future it's like you might hear something that they say that's like, hey, we didn't even realize there was a problem in one of these departments that now our data team could like come in and provide a solution for, and that only happens because you
Yeah.
have a relationship and then they feel comfortable sharing problems with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you also wanna hear them out of, like, what are their challenges? So in the influencing part of this, like, you don't wanna come across as like, "Well, I really just want my team to succeed, so I want to, create this relationship just to get to that." But it's
Yeah.
really trying to hear out from their lens, like, what are their challenges, and how does that fit to the value your team can provide? Um, and then supporting that, and there's many different ways of continuing to kind of build that relationship, and showing results definitely can lead to kind of building that trust, and them being then more hungry for like, okay, I really love this, I want more of this now.
Yes.
But there's a lot of time spent there for sure.
Yeah. With the fact that you've kind of worked across multiple companies, leading data teams one way or the other, do you feel like there's any common mistakes, or even things like in terms of that lead to success in data teams?
Yeah, I think from a mistakes and kind of success perspective, a lot of times, from a prioritization perspective, there's almost too much to do, right? Like,
Mm,
um, I well known for like Anna and her analogies, and I think one of the analogies that often I think about is like infinite number of fruit that are not like low hanging. They're like just sitting on the floor, all looking at you, like I'm ready to be picked up. And you can do anything, but you can't do everything, is something
yeah.
I often share to the team. And I don't know what it is, but we also in our DNA have almost this like excitement of like, I want to do it all. I want to like be part of everything.
Yeah.
But we do have to, think about like from the mistakes perspective, being more mindful of like enterprise prioritization. Like sometimes IT will have some goals and marketing will have some goals, but they're like within the goals, not even thinking about the dependencies or the need of other teams, or there's just too much scope that doesn't really allow you to make the impact you need on some of these things. I often think about like WIP limits, work in progress limits, of
Mm,
if you have like 10 things running at the same time, the likelihood of any of them completing quickly is pretty low. But if you really focus on like, I'm going to just focus on these three, like, I don't know, this quarter, let's say, we're really going to just focus on these three. There's a higher, potential of those being completed. And then you focus on the next set, right? So I think prioritization is an area that absolutely, have continued to see across companies where that can be a struggle. There's
Yeah.
almost just like too much to get done.
Yeah.
I think another one is like the investment on tech debt or investment in also like data maturity or like the back end. Um, when I think about like software development, there's also the concept of like back end and software and back end and front end software developers. And also like the back end folks often are like behind the scenes, right? Like they're like the plumbers that folks are not seeing doing a lot of the work. And there's also a component of like recognizing those teams and making sure there's like leadership that can see that, but also like education of it. Because if you're not close to the back end and where it is today, where we want it to be and to mature it, you won't be able to invest in it, right? Because you're really
Mm.
not aware of where it is and where it actually should be. So it's like forgotten
Mm.
sometimes. So I feel like that's like maybe another area that across companies I've seen, and different companies will go about this differently, right? Like if it's a very large organization, it'll actually move even slower. If it's a startup, it'll like actually maybe not be as much of as an issue, but um, you'll definitely have that one come up. And then I think another one I often think about that I'm a huge proponent of is continuous improvement.
Mm.
So like sometimes we will like have some mistakes and we just have them reoccur and reoccur again and again, but we're not taking the moment to stop and it's like, how can we actually learn from this thing that already happened to us? And what action are we going to take and complete that action so that we don't run into that again?
Hmm.
Right. So a lot of time can be spent in just like doing the same things again and again, even though we all say like we don't want to do these things again and again. Um, there's some of that that like just continues to happen sometimes at organizations, and prioritizing that I think can lead to success. From the successes perspective that you mentioned that that I've seen across these companies, I think I've been really fortunate of the companies that I worked for, like being able to provide some investment in training or development or leadership development, like whatever development needed, and staying close to what are the new trends in data or new technology, and um, being open to thinking about those and how they can support the organization. I think that's been great to see for sure. And another item that comes to mind for successes is like having some space for innovation. Definitely would love to see more of this, but have been fortunate to see this space be created at few organizations that I was able to be a part of. And I think the teams really benefit from having that, not only from like a collaboration and getting to know other folks, but like really thinking about them having the opportunity to bring ideas to the table of like um, how we can improve, the business. And maybe they are ideas that haven't been considered before. So like at Kaiser Permanente, we did Shark Tank. Actually like pretty fun event too. We would meet in person and even get a little like shark trophy. But yeah, it's like definitely, making sure that there's a space for that. I think that can lead to success, particularly like in the data space.
Yeah. How do you? I guess how do you set that up? Because you said you were fortunate enough to have it at several companies. I imagine it's not that they were like, here you go. I imagine you had to ask.
Yeah, I think it was like a mix, but we did have, thinking back like at Kaiser, we did have a leadership team that was very much like, we need to do something fun and we need to be able to like, hear the ideas of the team. So like, I think it goes a long way when there's like leadership sponsorship when they are kicking that off.
Hmm.
Oftentimes when it's like the team bringing it up, it may not get the momentum that you want to see. So, um, I think making sure the leadership team is creating that space. And same at Vail, we did have we were fortunate to have that be made available. And so I think you do want to have some sponsorship for sure from your leadership team to get that started and set it up, and then kind of self-organize within your leaders on your team and make it a fun event.
Yeah, yeah. Then you have to succeed because they've put effort into it. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of along those lines, like in terms of getting buy-in, right? I feel like it can be harder, especially for like data teams that for some companies are viewed as cost centers. For some they're not, but for some they are. How do you kind of get budget for projects? Do you feel like in those spaces?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think of a few things. So one, going back to what we were just talking about of like leadership sponsorship, I think that really helps when you have a leader that believes in the need of something and that will support it and speak to it. That can make a huge difference. And so if there's someone in the organization that is like that sponsor, even if they're not in your department or whatnot, being able to leverage that is huge. Another way is thinking about like the ROI. Obviously, there's like some documentation that you probably want to put together to kind of show the why this can be impactful for the business and bring back um, benefits to the organization. Total cost of ownership is something that I was more recently looking at as a way of, kind of creating that story of like why we need to invest in something.
Mm,
There's often like hidden cost that we do not measure. It's almost like this iceberg, and we're
yeah,
only thinking about the cost is this, but there's really this whole other part of the iceberg that if like tech dev is an example, like if we don't invest in modernizing, this tech dev continues to grow, and there's hidden costs of like things are running slower or
yeah,
things are collecting risk and time or whatnot. So that's another way, but definitely to bring it up to your leadership has to be kind of presented in a way to that audience that is actionable for them and that it makes sense to them. Um, you think another idea that comes to mind that I've seen work in the past is having a proof of concept. So you may not necessarily have the funds yet, um, but you can prove to the business the value and get them to be interested enough from the proof of concept that they're like, okay, I need to invest in this. This is
yeah,
like amazing. This is an unlock. And so sometimes you will get some funding to do a POC. Sometimes you don't get anything at all. And so you're almost working all your other projects and the POC, and that can be challenging. But in the end, in the many examples I've seen, that has always led to success of like
mm,
getting them the investment that you need.
mhm,
Um, So those are kind of some ideas. Showing data that can back up for sure, like something's
yeah,
wrong or something needs investment in, is another great way. And another thing that I think of is like from a budget perspective, if there's a way that you could be budget neutral of like, can you maybe reduce some costs somewhere else, but then you're going to increase this cost, but in the end, it'll be budget neutral. But trying to think about it in a way that's creative of like, actually, we don't need this anymore. We could just migrate this to whatever other place and
yeah,
we can avoid this cost. Um, or as you're building relationships with other departments, can you split the cost with them? Like
mhm,
that's another great way that I know for me that was kind of like my approach for growing Tableau in the organization of like, okay, there's this problem and we can't get past it. Like, what's the other way to kind of think about this? And so that could be another avenue. But I think the biggest one is going to have like that, it's going to be like that leadership sponsor for sure. That's going to help you kind of sell the need for a project, particularly for like maybe a team that is not revenue generating or something like that.
yeah. How? Because I've definitely heard when you talk to different directors, people talk about splitting costs in between like cost centers. How do you do that? How do you have that conversation? Because I imagine you being to another director, hey, will you give me $20,000? Because that's what you're basically saying. Like, hey, I know you have a
Yeah.
budget too. How do you start that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the way I like to use data to back up what I'm asking for, and so in the example that I was mentioning of like Tableau, is like, well, if I can provide, a report that has some cuts of like number of licenses per department or something like that, then in a way I can show you the percentage of total that you would kind of own. And sometimes the conversation's not easy because they'll be like, oh, but like in the past, I never had to pay for anything and it was fine. And so thinking about that this can allow for the teams to scale,
Yeah.
right? That you're kind of approaching this wall where you can't continue to have it grow. I think you also need to be mindful of like the cost and partnering closely with your finance team and procurement team also to try to maybe get a good discount maybe from your vendors and things like that. But trying to use the data to show, and oftentimes they're like, oh, it's just that amount. Oh no, that's fine. Like we have budget for that.
Yeah.
And so it's more of those ones that are like much bigger, but then thinking about other options maybe that you can provide
Yeah.
within that. Sometimes there'll be sub teams within a department even. And so, I mean, you don't want to split hairs, but
Yeah. Yeah, because
sometimes,
you're now making me think about, like, every once in a while, you hear someone be like, "Oh, how do we get, like can we get half an FTE? You take half an FTE." I think that's
yeah,
sometimes a big win, like, when sometimes, like, both company teams need an analyst or something, and they'll be like, "We'll just hire this person and
yes,
split their time," is a very common, I think, thing I've seen.
yeah. So I've definitely had those conversations. So both from like a software technology side, but also resource. And so I think if you're leading like data engineering, data enablement type team, you may not necessarily need like a full headcount.
Yeah.
But then you run into this case that you just mentioned where it's like, well, I need funding from many, but if I only have the one, then I can't move forward.
Yeah.
And so in that case, I've done like, okay, I'll, receive an X amount and then fund via a contractor. And maybe it's less amount of hours, but I feel like there's a little bit even more overhead with that. And then also it's a little bit more expensive too. So but that can be an avenue to like then prove that that's too expensive, that's better to fund with other teams. And so like continuing to learn and evolve the where you are from, but never losing the opportunity to like get started and get moving forward. And then the other way is having, I think this one's the most interesting, of like you need to work on building relationships, right, with
Yeah.
others, but then also work on others getting to know each other, like almost like introduce one another and introduce it, like being that connection between different parts of the business so that then they can like, oh yeah, this absolutely makes sense and I know what you're trying to do. And so that's another way of doing that for sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, as someone who's usually more from the outside in, or even like creating relationships in between businesses, sometimes on the consulting side, that'll often sometimes be the thing. I'll be like, oh, this person has this problem. This person solves this problem. I could
Yes.
just introduce them. And I think people don't
Exactly.
don't always see that it's valuable, but it's sometimes a huge value when
Oh
people
my
are just like,
gosh.
if you could solve this problem with the introduction, that can be a huge way of one,
Oh
you looking good. Like you don't have to solve every problem, and you can still come out, looking like you're doing the right thing. I shouldn't say looking. You
yeah.
are doing the right thing.
Yeah,
Uh,
you are. Absolutely. You made me think of something just now. So I'm a huge proponent of having like a community of practice or like a center of excellence. And I think when you have that, you create a community, right? And that otherwise wouldn't have known each other. And then you no longer need to even be that middle person that's like trying to connect the dots. Like they are seeing it themselves. And if sometimes they're presenting content or something, they'll be like, oh my gosh, that team did that thing. And that's the thing that we need to do too. We just need to connect.
yeah,
And you didn't even have to go through the like, I'm going to present you like this other team. It's like they're like self organizing and doing that. And so it's much more organic. But yeah, I agree. I think you want to enable that for sure.
Yeah, that's making me think of. So I created a group recently for consultants to start talking, and that's what I've like. At first, I was like, I'm gonna have to answer all the questions. I'm gonna have to like, and it's gonna be a lot of work. And I'm finding it's like, oh, someone will ask a question. There's like three other people that have a good answer, and this is awesome, right? And so
Yeah,
yeah, just creating some avenue that people can connect and get questions answered, I think is a huge value add. Um,
absolutely. Yeah, I love that.
yeah. So you kind of started like we actually we haven't talked. We talked about this more on our pre-call, but we talked about like data maturity. And there's always this desire for companies to be like, we want whatever the next thing is, right? We want AI, we want whatever is after AI. So do you have like a framework for data maturity? Because I think that plays a big role in having conversations with leadership to be like, hey, maybe we're not there yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's many frameworks out there for sure that can be leveraged. And I'm always a big fan of looking at like what Gartner has available in terms of different frameworks or studies or research that they have to understand where other companies are at too. One that comes to mind that I know I've used quite a bit in the past is thinking about people process technology. And so um, identifying in those three areas where you are today and where you actually want to be, right? And so the reason, to kind of split it or leverage this framework and split it in that way is like oftentimes one of these will be forgotten. It's like, oh, we need all this technology. And it's like, yeah, it doesn't matter all the technology you get. If we don't have like the people with the skill set to maintain this technology,
Yeah.
it will not work, right? Or we'll have like the people and the technology, but then they have no process and they're just like, you know, chickens with their heads cut off trying to like figure the whole thing out and they can't
Yeah.
because they don't have a good process. And so I think thinking about that when I think of people process technology, I, from the people aspect, do you have the right talent? Do you have the right org structure? Do you have the right skills? And then from a process perspective is more of like, do you have the right maybe documentation of your process or people understanding the
Hmm.
process, the data governance, compliance, um, definition of actual things like what is your, I don't know, what is your strategy as it relates to how many years of data do you keep? Like
Hmm.
you need like that's part of kind of the process of like well defining some of these things. And then from a technology aspect, like what is your architecture? What is it now? Where do you want to be? And then you can see like gaps of like, definitely this is not where it needs to be. Another framework that I think is helpful, like particularly in the analytics space, is like thinking about where a given either department or line of business or whatever may apply to, to your world, but where are they in their journey, right? And how do you get them to that next level? And so, like, are they underdeveloped that you ask them, like, hey, where do you get this data from? We don't even know. I just know I get the spreadsheet. I don't really even know where it comes from. And, uh, or are they, and then it's like a spreadsheet is not even like centralized anymore, not automated. So, like, are they in this underdeveloped phase?
Hmm.
Are they in this very reactive phase that they're just like trying to answer a question as it comes? Or are they like more upfront and proactive and thinking about we know that these questions will need to be answered and we already have answers to those and we're actually predicting being able to be more upfront. And then are they like optimized? So like maybe 4 to 5 different stages and identifying where they're at and how do you work to get them to the next level? Because I feel like just like kids, right? You don't go like, oh, they have a diaper and then they're like adults. Like there's some stages they have to like go through. That would be nice if they just like went like immediately to like optimize. But working through those stages and understanding that each different area is at a different stage. Like sometimes we almost would assume that they're all at the same stage and they may not be. So it requires there's different gaps or different investments that need to be made. And then a manager that I worked with not too long ago, one framework that he used that I thought was super useful is like, and maybe this is more of like of a back end type of framework. Because again, I feel like there's so many frameworks out there. There's probably like from a data governance perspective framework or quality, et cetera. But this other one had to do with like the access of the data. Is it integrated? Because you could have data, but if it's just like not even integrated to anything else, probably not as useful.
Yeah.
And then is it captured accordingly? Like, is there good data capture there or not? Is it like readily available? Like I can actually use it real time right now to answer a decision, or to make a decision? Or is it like, I can get the data for last month, whatever. And it's like, well, I mean, that's like useful, but maybe not for some other decisions I want to make. And so thinking about it that way,
Yeah.
like access, integration, automation, I think is another good framework to have. But there's definitely, and this is where again the front end, back end, like you can think about it from a front end perspective
Yeah.
of how to mature, from a back end perspective, how to mature. But those I think are good frameworks. And um, one other thing maybe to add here is being able to lean on other companies. And I think the networking can definitely help with this as well. Of like, well, how have they done it,
Yeah.
right? This is what I really enjoy from going to conferences. Of you go into a session and out of nowhere you're seeing like completely different industry, et cetera, and they're like sharing how they solve something. You're like, oh my gosh, that's what we need to do. Um, and yeah, like being able to understand, well, how other companies are going about different or similar problem.
Yeah. It almost seemed like you were building up a little bit of a maturity framework as you were talking, because it's like, oh yeah, we could like build some accesses. What's your integration like? What's your automation like? I like the reference to like it's just so visual, like the analyst or the end user who's like, hey, I get this sheet. I
Uh-huh.
don't know where it comes from. I'm like, wow, that is something I've definitely experienced where it's like, yeah, that is a level of data maturity that exists where it's like, yeah, it's everything's in sheets and people don't even know kind of where the data comes from. Is definitely this like base level where you're first starting out kind of level of data. Or I guess no data is where you really start out. But
Yeah, exactly. No.
eventually you go to this, okay, we're getting sheets, but I don't know where it's coming from. It kind of just gets created and someone's,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, that's
Absolutely.
funny. With that, right, and probably also because of conferences, a lot of people are going around being like, "We want AI." Do you feel, I guess, like there's a good way of framing conversations for people who maybe aren't ready for AI, or even like if you are ready, how do you kind of have that conversation?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I'm sure one that like all companies are trying to answer today. Like, and there's some education aspect of this as well. I think like oftentimes, our leadership may assume almost, right. And this is why I really think not forgetting the back end and the investment and like the understanding of where it is today and where we actually need to be. Um, because they may assume like, oh yeah, like everyone's doing AI, so we're just gonna do this, right? And it's like, well, actually, in order to do this, you want to probably have like good data quality because you want to get, kind of the, if you put in bad data in, bad kind of decisions out, very likely, like you want to be able to, ensure there's something in place for the data quality, but also from like a governance, compliance, and privacy perspective, like
Yeah,
having something in place for that. And then also like, oh, we want to do AI for the space. And it's like, oh, but we just have like spreadsheets. It's like, well, that's not really very mature or ready yet for this. So like um going back to the framework, and it's like, well, where are we in that space? Yes, that space we could attempt AI. This space we're not really ready yet, and to get to that we need to go through this journey first of maturing it or investing. um and then I think like the pace at what, like, you're working on other things too, right? And so like going back to what I shared originally of like some of those mistakes, it's like we want to continue to have the business running, but we want to do these cool new projects too. How do you prioritize in a way that, yes, you can have some time and space to do some of that, but also you only have the same team probably. So are there other things we need to like trade off or, deprioritize to provide the actual space? Because otherwise you go back to this, like we have 200 things going on and then none of them move forward, or we don't get to see the impact as quickly as we would like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way. Again, going back to the spreadsheets, like if we're in spreadsheets, AI is far away from us for now, or if our data quality is bad. So
Yeah.
no, I think that's funny.
Yeah.
So now, kind of dipping on to the other side and talking about people who are just kind of maybe getting started and looking for jobs. As someone who's kind of probably done plenty of hiring, and kind of seeing the current landscape, which I think is interesting. Right, we've got a very, I guess, bumpy kind of landscape in hiring. Like, do you have any tips for people looking for new roles?
Yeah. I think like depends of, what type of roles for sure they're looking at, but I think like if it's specific to given skills that I would recommend for like in the data space, like for sure, master your like very strong SQL. Good to have, good ETL, ELT experience, cloud experience. um, I think prior exposure to working with like version control or automation, um, visualization, like and I think these are all transferable. Of like, well, I've worked with this tool, but not that one. But being able to have the base, I think, is important. Um, when it comes to from a hiring perspective, and I find candidates like, okay, I have a few candidates and they have this experience. There's often some things that are like harder to train, right? And kind of like those soft skills.
Mm,
And I think, if folks are looking for a new role, and you're competing with so many, different folks out there, um, I think your ability to like adapt is super important. Your ability to want to learn new things, and that you've shown, record in your past roles that you like can pick up a new thing. You're not afraid of that, or you're not afraid of the wearing many hats. Like sometimes that'll happen in a role where it's like, well, it's kind of my focus, but then these other things came up, and that you work through that, right? I think this is harder to kind of catch in like an interview process, and for the folks that you're looking at, but like how curious are they? How receptive to change or feedback are they? Because I think nowadays we face like change on a day-to-day basis. Like there's just something new, and how good will they do facing that? The cross-functional collaboration for sure, and communication, like it's just key.
yeah,
It's like a base, but I think from like if folks definitely want to get noticed and the roles that they're applying to, um, being able to highlight the impact that they've made in their prior roles, um, maybe more than the like how you did it, is like, well, what was the impact, right, that you made? And then yeah, like folks that are can adapt, and excited to like drive positive impact to the organization that they go to, that they believe in this like continuous improvement, like what's next, like okay, we got here, like what do we do next?
yeah,
And some of those things are just like more on the like soft skills, if you yeah, if you
yeah.
think about it.
Yeah, and like I think you kind of also referenced a little bit like ownership towards the end there, and I think there is something to that where it's like you have to be willing to like not just be told like, hey, we
Yeah.
need to do this. You kind of have to grab it and be like, "Yeah, thank you for giving me the idea. Let me go run with it. Even if you run the wrong direction a little bit, at least showing that you're willing to kind of take some risk there and try to own something.
Oh my gosh, that one is huge. I'm glad you mentioned that one, Ben. It's like having like that initiative, right? And also like there's almost some like ambition to it as well. It's like, oh, I think this is like great space. And I think there's obviously, you want to make sure that, there is the budget for these things, or there is the capacity, et cetera. But like that folks are thinking about that, and are self-starters, like that's huge,
Yeah.
right? If you have, no matter at what role, but if you have someone that's just always like, well, I'm just kind of waiting to know what to do. It's like, well, be really useful, right? Like, what are your ideas? Bring your ideas to the table, and maybe we can make them true.
Yeah, yeah. I
True.
think that's a quote from like Steve Jobs or something. You don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. You hire
Yeah,
smart people and
exactly.
have them tell you what to do.
Exactly.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah. So taking a step back, like bigger picture, like do you have any thoughts in terms of like where data is going in the next few years?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's not going anywhere. It's it's grown so much, right? Like I think even looking back the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, it's just like exponential growth in this space in so many aspects. And so I think for sure it's going to be more important, to think about the quality of the data that's there so that you can kind of remove some of the noise, um, and then also the more of like the governance of this data and access, and more process around that, because also with so much of that you can definitely get into trouble. I feel like, and um, I don't know, I think those two spaces probably, very important. Another area that I think about a lot too is like data nowadays flows like to so many different places, and it's like the spaghetti almost. And how can you streamline that in a way that it's, because it often starts with like, well, but this, we, got this tool before we did this. And so then that's why it flows there, and then it flows over here. And this is where you start to build all the tech dev stuff. But how can you untangle all of that and, create almost like this, more standardized design pattern of like how the data is meant to flow?
Yeah.
And again, this is where we are today. This is where we would like to be. And then bringing, the leadership along, to be advocates to get it to the right place, because it can save a lot of time for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you make me think, and we often call it like spaghetti pipelines.
Yeah.
Um, I think that was definitely something that I was very impressed by, and it's not just Facebook. It's just that's the company I work for, obviously, but there's
Okay.
other large tech companies that do this really well, where it's like they literally would pick such a I'd argue almost simple data architecture. Like it would be complex in other ways, where from a scale perspective, but it'd be like, look, all 1,000 data engineers at Facebook, we're all going to use the same data pipeline tool, and that just gives you so much like ability to like have standardization and easy to
Yeah.
transfer people, and so I do think there's something to that, because like then you go to like almost any other company and it's like, well, this data team uses Informatica, this data team uses Airflow, this data team,
Yeah.
and so you'll have like 20 data pipeline tools alone,
Yeah.
and so it's very interesting kind of seeing how things can kind of go, but it's really hard to like get everyone to like agree to be like, let's just use this one solution.
Yeah. Like having like a reference architecture of like, I mean, you may not necessarily, maybe there's something new you're introducing, and there's some slight difference needed into what is originally there, but something you can reference. Same like with the frameworks, something you can reference versus starting from scratch. I think there's huge value to that. Same for like the ways of working, like, there's Scale Agile, there's proven ways, frameworks that already exist that you can leverage. You don't have to necessarily follow it perfectly, but instead of starting from scratch, leverage some of those like foundational elements that are important, and then you'll get going. Like you'll at least be pointed in the better, like, yeah, like in a better direction, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. And then Jessica says, "Untangling the data pipeline spaghetti" should be the title of this episode. Man. So yeah, no, that is definitely an interesting thing I think about data, not just in companies, but so many companies between companies share data in ways that like can get so chaotic where it's like, yeah, we take this data, we send it via SFTP to this other company. Maybe it eventually even comes back to the original company at some point. It would be very interesting if you could like tag like data to that level and like see the lineage across companies, because I think that would be
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, there's
a
just so much to this data space, but for sure, like data lineage and oh my gosh, so much on that. Yeah. It's
yes,
like
yeah.
a world of its own even.
It really is. I think again, I think a lot of people maybe they'd be surprised, maybe they wouldn't. It depends on how long you've worked in data in terms of like how what might feel maybe archaic a little bit, like data is still just transferred around. It's like, yeah, it's a bunch of CSV files that are just transferred around at midnight from company A to company B, and then we upload it and then make copies.
Yeah.
And
Well, and it's important to have this because like I know with my prior team, it was used for like impact analysis. Like if you have a good data lineage, you are able to then, like if you're going to migrate something or make some changes, you can, with having the data lineage, you can actually better understand the estimate of the level of effort to do some work
mm,
versus if you have no sense of it, it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I cannot even imagine that actually.
yeah, you can't even tell. It's like, well, we just got to migrate this one table. And it's like, well, yeah, but like that one table has like 20 data pipelines that like
Oh
build
my
into it.
gosh.
So,
Yeah.
or maybe has one, but you don't know. So, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So
absolutely.
it's all these basics, which then brings me to this kind of probably one of the last questions since we're running out on time here.
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's a lot of hype in any part of the space? It doesn't, not just in AI, but like, any part of the space.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's definitely like some buzzwords and that folks will definitely like throw out there and very generalized like for some of the reporting that companies do like you may not need for it to be real time and it's like I need real time data and it's like maybe like just in time is good enough and so that's one that comes to mind with the real time analytics. I think for data driven too, huge proponent of leveraging data for decision making, but understanding that decisions are not purely based on data. There's also some like human
Yeah.
judgment and aspect to it, right? And oftentimes like that can be confused. Like, well, the data just says X. It's like, well, okay, but let's try to understand what it's saying. And then also like, what do we think about this? From that perspective. Um, and then, yeah, I think for sure AI, like we already talked about, like assessing where the company is in their data maturity journey from all the different frameworks we just talked about, because otherwise it may just be something that we want to do, but we're not really set up to do just yet or something like that. Yeah. So those are three that come to mind. Maybe one last one that just came to mind too is the education. I can't stress this one enough. It's like I'm a big proponent of like educating the leadership team and not shying away from that on like
Mm,
the technology aspect. And when I mention like the people process technology, some folks will miss almost like the technology. That's too much jargon. Let's like not even talk about that. And it's like, no, actually we need to have these transparent conversations so that the proper investments
yeah.
happen there.
Yeah, on the flip side, I guess I think something I've heard from people is like, yes, the right leadership and maybe the rest of the business, there needs to be this literacy on technology and data. But like on the flip side, the data team sometimes needs a little bit of business literacy added in as well, right? So they're
Yeah.
not just kind of in their own little bubble and being like, oh, I'm building a data warehouse. It's like, why? But like, what does that connect with
Yeah.
everything else?
Oh my gosh. That is so important as well. Absolutely. It's like yeah, like we need to understand why we're building something versus just build it. I think that goes along with the like that curiosity and
Mhm.
the taking initiative. It's like, wait a minute, why did they even ask this question? Let me actually try to understand more and zoom out. Which really is like that going from IC to manager directors, like zooming out for sure, not being so much in the weeds because yeah, the IC will just like done next.
Yes, which I think early on it makes sense, right? Like when you're
Yeah,
starting your career, I think it's almost
absolutely.
a necessary step. Like you referenced earlier,
Oh,
it's kind of like you don't go from a toddler to an adult. I think
yeah.
I do often find it's like in some ways you can be told that like, yeah, you need to be curious, you need to be able to do all this stuff. But I do think early on in your career, you should focus on being really good technically and like building up that skill. And then once you get really good there, then it's like, okay, now you can start asking like
Yeah,
why more often. Like you can start asking why a little bit towards the beginning, but really your focus is like, let's get really good at delivering and then
agree.
kind of go to that next step and be like, okay, now why am I delivering this anyways?
Yes, absolutely, and even staying close a bit to, like, you don't want like, understanding the weeds, like, you don't need to be in it, but understanding it, because if you get too far off from it too, then there'll be, like, this disconnect,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, again, Anna, thank you so much for your time. And we're at time. I don't want to hold you too long, but do you have any final thoughts before we kind of sign off?
No, thank you so much for appreciate having me here. I appreciate it, Ben, and big fan of your work and excited to see, all of what you continue to do, and thanks for having me here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this, and I'm excited to see where you're, wherever you're going next. Awesome,
Yeah,
cool, awesome.
awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm gonna
Have a
hit
good one.
end.
Bye, folks.
Bye. Thank you.